Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to another video and I hope you guys are doing well today. I want to talk to you in this video around Arcane Mage. Now, Arcane Mage follows the trend of specs that suit me really well. Hard hitting, ranged, happy days, and actually super tanky as well. It was a spec I played from TOGC all the way through to near Biss Firelands in original Wrath and Cata, and I describe Arcane by saying it is the simplest complicated spec in the game. Now, what on earth does that mean? Arcane was played briefly in Wrath during Tier 7, quickly swapped out for Fire in Tier 8 and became a thing of the past, and I do think it holds a bad reputation for being quite a boring spec. Unfortunately, not much changes for Arcane in Cata, and I think if you didn't like it in Wrath, you're probably not going to like it in Cata. It still is a two-phase kind of spec in which you have the massive burn phase and then a preservation phase. Now, what makes this simple spec so complicated is the burn phase and getting it right every time. This is the time in which you want to pop arcane power, trinkets, racials, flame orb, use your mana gem after a few casts to get spell power buff and more mana, cast as many arcane blasts as you can, and do all of this whilst moving minimally or not at all. You finish with an Evocate into a very simple preservation setup of like 2 to 4 Arcane Blasts, and a Spender, which is like Missiles or Barrage. Now, this is what I mean by simplicity. Overall, none of that is particularly difficult. However, executing this on some fights is a nightmare. I'll use Lord Rhyolith as an example. A fight with lots of movement throughout the fight, no real time, good time to have like 20 to 30 seconds of burning every 2 minutes, you only get one phase right at the end. Arcane just isn't a good spec for that fight. I'll even give another example. Ice Howl or Beasts in TOGC. Now, you're going to start the fight, you're going to pump into the first one, you're going to do some damage. There's a little bit of movement on snakes. You want to make sure that you will have to time and plan your cooldowns to hit the big DPS windows of Ice Howl charging. So you have to plan back 2 minutes every time from that. So planning is a massive thing with Arcane. And this unfortunately is one of the weaknesses with the spec. Fire brings similar levels of burst damage with Combust, higher DPS just generally, ability to DPS while moving, and the versatility to handle many more situations. Even Frost brings extreme levels of burst on a 30-second window with Deep Freeze, and procs to use whilst moving. Arcane will likely be the spec that mages play again for the first few weeks of gearing, maybe even early tier 11 progress, but I expect Fire will take over very, very soon and be the prominent spec for the expansion. For me personally, my mage will be Fire and Arcane. I really enjoy the spec and would play it whenever possible without griefing, but I'd also have a Fire spec to play when I need to. All of this encounters single target, and Arcane has one of the most confused AoE rotations also. To maximise AoE, you want to build up 4 stacks of Arcane Blast, so you're starting AoE by doing single target. You can then go into Arcane Explosions, which is great, it actually does a lot of damage, as long as you can be in melee and maintain the Arcane Blast debuff. If you can't maintain the buff, or you can't be in melee, you then just alternate Flame Strikes and Blizzards. All of this to do less than a Fire Mage again. So why would you bring an Arcane Mage? Because it's not been a very positive video so far, and I do actually like Arcane Mage. They bring some niche buffs that can be very beneficial. The first is Time Warp, which is a Bloodlust effect. Now, with the strength of like Fire Mages and Ellie Shamies, I don't expect this to be a difficult buff to attain in a raid, but it's still a good choice to bring one. 3% damage. Now, this is actually one of the hardest buffs to get into a raid, and very, very strong. It's only brought by Arcane, Ret, and Beastmaster. Now, with Ret being a huge damage and utility pick, it's typically the dominant choice. Arcane also brings the 6% spell power buff, which is overwritten by the stronger 10% spell power buff brought by Demo and Ellie. Ellie? Ooh. However, still better than nothing, an increased mana. Finally, then you have Focus Magic. Now, an Arcane-only ability, this remains on the more beneficial spells in the game for your raid. So overall, they have a lot of utility, a spec that can hold its own with one of the strongest range specs in the game in damage, being Fire Mage, on low movement fights. Arcane is a spec that will get massively overlooked, but it's actually in a good spot for Cata, so if you do enjoy it, I genuinely recommend you going and trying it.